Hello and welcome back to The Hatch. I'm Sammy Roth.
And I'm Rosie Murphy, and this is the podcast where we talk about Lost.
We are watching Season 5, Episode 5, This Place is Death, a line that is spoken by a tragically dying Charlotte in this episode.
Our special guest this week is Fanula Flanagan, who played Eloise Hawking, who will appear at the end of this episode to foreshadow some events to come.
So we've got a good one for you here, and let's get right into it.
As always, we start every episode of The Hatch with a hot take. We've both just watched This Place is Death, so Sammy, what is your hot take?
So I think I'm going to have a bunch to say this week, like I have the last few weeks, about the Man in Black's manipulation of John Locke and how we feel about Locke during this and how we feel about the Man in Black during this. But I think the hot take I want to share is, in the scene where Locke goes down the well to turn the wheel, and he has this conversation with the Man in Black appearing as Christian Shepherd, although, of course, Locke doesn't know who he really is. The last thing that Christian says to Locke as the flash is happening, and as Locke turns the wheel, I guess I should say, and the flash begins, is, "Say hello to my son." Mm-hmm. And Locke says, who's your son? And then he flashes away and it's too late. And I'm just watching this thinking, what a sick fuck this guy is. Say hello to my son. Like, Jack is not your son. Like, you're impersonating the dead body of his father that he brought to the island and, like, goofing around with yourself and amusing yourself. Say hello to my son, just to mess with Locke. It's like, what is wrong with this guy in his head? Oh, dear.
Yeah, you're right. It is kind of sadistic and creepy to think that he's, like, performing the character of Christian Shepherd. Even though Locke, like, that has no bearing on this conversation with Locke because Locke doesn't know who Christian is.
Right.
He's just doing it to do it because it's fun, I guess.
Exactly. It's not needed for his plan. It doesn't mean anything to Locke. He's literally just amusing himself by pretending to be Jack's father when he is not.
I mean, I guess when you've been alive for hundreds of years, you gotta get your kicks somewhere. But yeah, this is pretty gross.
It's a very charitable explanation. Actually, I was reminded of what Jack says to the Man in Black later when he appears in Locke's form in the finale when they're lowering Desmond down, and Jack says, "You disrespect his memory by wearing his face." Mm-hmm. And that's how I was feeling here. You're not that Christian Shepherd was an angel, but you are very much disrespecting his memory at this point.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Agree.
That's my hot take about the Man in Black. Rosie, what do you got?
That's a good one. So obviously we have talked a lot on this show. All Lost fans have talked a lot about the payoffs that they think work and the payoffs that they feel like don't work so much. I will say that I think the Rousseau payoff in this episode really works. I mean, not only do we get to meet the French science team, which, we saw at the very end of last week's episode, but we get to see this whole sequence of events that was described, I think, in season 1.
Yeah.
When she says, it killed them, they were infected. So not only is all of this drama taking place, but Jin is there for all of it. There was this extra member of the party who, in fact, was, a member of our party the whole time. Which I get was probably written in after the fact, but for me, it really worked.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I would go one step further and say not only was it super cool to see that Jin was a part of this, Jin actually played a pivotal role in the story of what happened next and the story that we ultimately learn. It's Jin who prevents Danielle from going down into the temple, under the temple, and getting infected.
Yeah, he's the reason that she is here at all.
He's the reason she is here. He's the reason Alex is here. Because, who knows what would have happened with that, but I suspect that, either Rousseau would have died pre-childbirth or Alex would not have been able to fend for herself without a mother to take care of her at least those first few days before she got kidnapped. No, Jin, and it's kind of one of those, those circular time loop kind of mind-bending type things, because, Jin asking Danielle not to go down there because he wanted to protect her was clearly directly motivated by him knowing her in the future and wanting to, wanting to save her from this fate. I mean, he knew that going down there was a bad idea. Right. So it's pretty fascinating, and I agree, a fabulous payoff.
Yeah, and one that I don't really think they needed to do in the level of depth that they did
But it's so cool that they
But
did.
it's so cool that they did.
It's really, really cool. Man, I mean, so many of the things, like, I mean, basically everything that happens, and I'm sorry if you don't mind my expanding on your hot take a little here.
Please.
But basically everything that happens is really exactly as Danielle, tells us later on, which is kind of remarkable because so much of that story, like her telling them that she took the pin out of, whatever the mechanism was in the rifle, which I believe she does tell us back in season 1, like, and that they were all going crazy and that they would have killed her. It's like, it sounds like in a lot of ways the ravings of a lunatic who, went crazy and killed her team. But no, Robert tried to shoot her and it didn't work for exactly the reason that she said it did, which is that she stopped him. Yeah. It's quite cool. And I mean, seeing Montan lose his arm, which is referenced in Exodus as well, like, it took me all the way back to Arst when he tried to jump ship on the group and they said, "What are you doing?" He said, "That was before Montan lost his friggin' arm." It's like, and here we go, Montan losing his...
Wow, great callback.
Thank you. Montan is such an asshole, by the way, and I'm kind of glad they made him an asshole before ripping his arm off, because then you can enjoy it a little bit more.
Just like the arts treatment.
Just like the arts treatment. So true. So true. No, it's so cool to see this. And I think you're right. They didn't have to, but it's great, great, great television.
Yeah.
They did. Poor Rousseau, by the way. Her story is so tragic.
God, seriously, what a dark, dark tale and a grim life. And
it made me really wish that she hadn't died in this so sudden way that she did, which was already a sort of a not satisfying death in the moment, but I feel especially unsatisfying about it after watching this episode. Like, this one makes me really think, like, wow, it would have been super cool if she could have gotten off of the island. Like, I would have just loved to imagine, even if they didn't show it, like, what would Rousseau's life had been like if she was on the plane at the end and could have gotten home. Like, I feel like that would be up there with Richard in terms of, like, just fascinating to think about how they would handle readjusting to real life off the island.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, speaking of Jin, a brief note here just to say that the Jin and Sawyer reunion is just lovely. Like, it brought a big smile to my face. These two friends embracing despite having recently held one another at gunpoint, as one does. Finally we get a reunion. Finally. And a reunion that's not extremely fraught. Just people who are happy to be back in the same place again. It's been so long. It's so nice to see.
I couldn't agree more. That brought a big, big smile to my face. Sawyer looked so happy. I mean, it made Sawyer happy. His friend was still alive. The Jin storyline, by the way, like, I'm just trying to imagine while watching this, like, what must have been going through his head. Like, he doesn't have Faraday there to explain to him what's going on. He finds out he's in 1988, apparently. Like, and he doesn't speak the language, and he is, like, piecing together in his mind, like, did I go back in time? Like, what's going on? I mean, I just can't imagine how he's even trying to make sense of that to himself. It must be so disorienting.
Yeah, and yet he rolls with it relatively quickly.
True.
I guess what other choice does he have? But and once he is reunited with the island party, the part where he asks after Sun, and finds out that she's gone. Initially he's disappointed, of course, because they can't be reunited and they're being thwarted that. But then when Jin learns that what Locke is leaving the island to do is to bring everyone, including Sun, back, he's able to say, absolutely not, please don't do that, and tell her that I'm dead. And he gives Locke his wedding ring as proof. That broke my heart. I mean, that's Jin saying, the thing that has been my North Star, I'm willing to give up. I'm willing to never see the love of my life again. Because that means bringing her back here, which is so sad, as their story always is, because of course Sun is over here on the other side of this mirror, wanting so badly to believe it when Ben tells her that Jin is alive, and wanting that so much that, of course, what she decides in next week's episode is to go back. And it's so sad. It's always so sad with them.
Yeah, it's rough to watch, and And meanwhile, Sun, off the island, is like, as we've discussed the last few weeks, like, going into sort of, assassin mode here with Ben, and has Erin in the back of the car, and she's like getting a call from her baby daughter, her infant daughter, and her mother on her cell phone as she like prepares her gun to go out and shoot Ben. It felt to me like, wow, Sun is sort of becoming like her father here. Like revenge has turned her into this person who deals with shady exchanges of weapons and secret plots and following people. Like, this is the sort of mission that Mr. Paik would have sent Jin on in the past, I felt like, while watching this.
Ooh.
And now this is Sun and who she is. I mean, she's turning into her father, I think. And that's a result of the separation with Jin, and that's who she's become, even with the daughter at this point. It's quite intense.
Wow, that's a good interpretation.
Thank you.
You're right.
I appreciate that.
I think you're totally right, because I don't know that it's so much that she's becoming her father, because the motives are clearly not the same. But she has all of those tools at her disposal, right? Like the ability to move in those spaces and to have those conversations and to seek certain types of resources that, like, quote unquote normal people wouldn't know how to access or wouldn't be brave enough to turn to or confident enough to turn to.
Right, exactly.
She knows how to play that game, and so she plays it.
And the desire to play that game, motivated by loss and revenge.
Yeah, and I think it is revenge until it's not. And that happens at the end of this episode when Ben tells her that... Is that at the end of this episode, or was that last week? When Ben tells her that Jin is still alive.
That's the beginning of this episode.
It's the beginning of this episode. It's all running together a bit.
Yeah. Well, look, we're in the time travel season. I think it's fine.
Yeah, that's gonna happen. And initially she doesn't believe him, and he produces the wedding ring as proof. And then, she kind of comes around to the idea, I think, that she wants that to be true so badly that if there's even a sliver of a chance that it is true, she's willing to basically give up her own life, or whatever life she might have had.
Yeah.
In pursuit of it.
And it's the opposite of Jin, because he's on the island willing to give up his own life, or whatever life he might have had, to protect her, and she's willing to do the same to go and save him.
Right, and it's
kind of
they're
beautiful.
Each doing what the other doesn't want them to do.
True.
Because in an effort to reunite, which is beautiful and tragic.
But I think the choices they both make are perfectly reasonable and understandable here. I mean, of course, Sun's going to do everything she can to save him, regardless of putting herself in danger, regardless of their daughter. And of course, he's going to do everything he can to keep her from coming back to this horrible place where, as Charlotte kind of on the nose tells us, is death. I mean, I sympathize with both of them completely.
Yeah.
No, but hold on here. Another parallel here. This is just occurring to me now. They're both being manipulated, or they're both dealing with men who are attempting, at least, to manipulate them. Between Ben, who, plays this, as you said, the he's not dead card and gets out of his own death in a very Ben way, although, ironically, it turns out to be the truth, of course, but it works. And then, and he's telling her this for his own purposes. And he's telling her for his own purposes because he could have told her that Jin was alive before now. He didn't seek her out. He wasn't trying to help her. Like, right. He waited for this moment because it was the best moment to get her to flip and come to the island with him.
And because, as you said, he was trying to get out of his own death,
right.
Which is a funny way to put it, but it was accurate.
It was very reminiscent to me of the moment in Confirmed Dead, by the way, where Locke was about to shoot him, and he finally made the "I have a man on their boat" speech, which also turned out to be true, interestingly. Saved his life with two truths for once. Right. But anyway, to make the comparison to Locke on the island, and I was mad at Locke this episode, because I continue to be mad at Locke for not really his own fault, but he's being manipulated into doing a lot of things. But, he's there assuring, Jin, oh, Sun's alive, I can bring her back, it's going to fix everything, I just know, and, you have to listen to me and go along with my plan because it's the best thing for you and for Sun. And again, like, Locke is going on the thinnest of threads here of the 90 seconds that he spent with Richard while they were flashing through time and making some pretty big leaps in logic. But I think there's a parallel here between what Ben is doing and what Locke is doing, each of them trying to get Jin and Sun to go along with their scheme. Not that either of them is necessarily wrong or necessarily lying, but, both in their own ways, stretching reality to manipulate these people to support them in their goals. There's my new theory. Yes, no, shoot it down, agree with me, tell me what you think.
Definitely with you on Ben.
Okay.
Ben has an established record, as you say, of sort of keeping every card in his pocket for as long as possible until he is forced to play it. John, I think less so. I think John is a little bit too naive to be a good manipulator, I think. I think, we've seen him sort of try to convince people to come along with him and to serve his purposes, but I think it comes from a place of genuine belief in what he is trying to do, or, belief that he is walking in his purpose or whatever. Often when people ask John, why is this the case? He does answer honestly, and it's usually like, I don't know, or it just is, or the island told me to.
Yeah, I got frustrated when one of his answers this episode was, it just is. But yes, he means that. He definitely means that.
Yeah, it's not a good explanation, but it is an honest one. Whereas Ben, of course, is playing sort of semantic tricks, like saying, I said, I never went to meet Locke. I never said he never came to meet me, or vice versa. Like, okay, that's basically a lie. Which Locke doesn't do.
Well, I agree and I disagree. I think you're right that probably me describing Locke as manipulating is not the right word, but I mean, he doesn't lie, but I mean, he says to Jin this week before Jin makes him promise not to do this, he says, I promise I'll bring Sun back. And I'm just, to me, he's bullshitting there. Like, he has no idea if he can do that. He has no idea if he's going to be in a position to be able to do that. He has a belief that he'll have, that he's going to try to do that he thinks he can do it. But I promise I'll bring Sun back. I know, to me, he's telling Jin what he thinks Jin wants to hear there, even though he has no way of knowing if it's true or not. And I think at least part of Locke knows that. I think that he's acting like he knows things that he doesn't know, or that he has, some grand sense of, the past and the future here. And maybe he thinks he's onto something, but I think he knows that he doesn't really know that. I think he knows that he's bullshitting Jin. I mean,
thinking he's onto something and thinking he has a grand sense of the past and the future is like kind of John Locke's whole thing. So okay. I think you're right in that sense, but like, I do think, when John says, I promise I'll bring her back, it's, it's when we make a promise, it's not so much a statement of, it's not like a work invoice, right? Where you're saying like, I'm committing to do this and I know I can deliver this because I know I have the time and the resources and the capability. It's more like my will is set. I am committed to doing this thing. And in Locke's case, the undertone here is basically like, or die trying, because he is committed to bringing them all back to the island, and Sun is one of them. And I think if he were talking to Sawyer and this was about Kate, he would say basically the same thing, right? Like, I promise I'll bring her back. And it would, from Locke's perspective, it would be virtually the same conversation, because his intention is to bring them all back. And, it's a promise as much to himself as it is to them. But, like, of course he can't promise. None of us can ever promise anything. There is uncertainty in the world. But I do think he doesn't know that and he can't know that, but remember that John is a man of faith and believes so deeply that this is what his purpose is at this moment, despite the Man in Black's manipulation and X and Y and Z, that he thinks, well, this is my purpose at this moment. Of course, this is what I have to do. And of course, this is what I will do, because I've always found a way to do it before. Kind of. And again, like, that's not quite true, but I think that's what's going on in Locke's head.
That's fair, and I accept what you're saying. I think I'm probably being too harsh on Locke. I think I've been harsh on Locke throughout this entire podcast, frankly, which has been surprising to me because Locke, is my favorite character the first time around. But I guess I just wish that, it's one thing. I think it's one thing if he wants to believe so strongly in his own destiny and his own purpose, and that things are going to work out the way he and the island want them to, as he understands what the island wants to happen. But when it comes to taking all of these other people's lives and fates into his hand based on his own feeling of fate and purpose, it just becomes frustrating for me. And probably the comparison to Ben was not fair because Ben is doing it intentionally, you're right. But it's frustrating to me. I was frustrated by his interactions with Jin this week.
I think that's fair, and I think you can for sure make a case for, like, John has a bit of a God complex, or John, does these things and doesn't care so much who he hurts in the process. Like, he isn't sort of treating the people around him as full people with agency of their own, and is instead sort of seeing them all as chess pieces on a chessboard that he has to move to. Like,
yeah.
I would not say that he's treating the people around him with compassion, but I think he is trying to fulfill what he thinks his purpose is.
Right. And trying to do what he thinks is best for everyone else. Although that's a dangerous thing when you think you know what's best for everyone else.
Well, right. And Locke is the person who has said before that Boone is a sacrifice that the island demanded. I mean, he
True.
doesn't necessarily think that, like, the preservation of everyone's life is the most, including his own, is the most important thing, right? He's sort of so fixated on the greater good, big scare quotes around that he doesn't really worry about collateral damage. And
yeah, I mean, that was the part, talking about his own sacrifices, as you referenced, referring to the scene with Christian at the end, where Locke says that
Richard said I was going to die. I suppose that's why they call it sacrifice.
I mean, that's the part where I sympathize the most with Locke this episode, because, of course, even if he's not manipulating, or however you want to describe, he's treating the other people as pawns or chess pieces, but here is the man in black, the greatest manipulator of all, manipulating him into being willing to move forward toward his own death in service of what he thinks is his destiny, but at least in part is this, this scheme where that he's being led into to bring back the candidates so that the man in black can kill them. So I felt real bad for Locke in that moment, because it's so cathartic for him to think, I'm finally doing it. I'm finally, I'm willing to sacrifice myself and do what it takes. And here's a guy who's just, entertaining himself by pretending to be Jack's dad.
Right. That's kind of sad. That's tragic too, in a way. Yeah, like, Locke thinks that he is this sort of sacrificial lamb. We were talking a little bit prior to recording about why the Ajira flight is called 316. John 3:16, of course, is a very famous Bible verse that says, "For God so loved the world that he sent his only son, that whosoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life." And it's something that Christians often quote when talking about the sacrifice of Jesus, right? Who was sent to earth by God the Father to die, to become this sacrifice so that other people might, attain salvation. And that's sort of what happens in that final scene, except it's a weirdly warped version of it, right? Like, the biblical allegory would be that Christian shepherd is God the Father, and that John is sort of a Christ figure who's being sent to die so that everyone else may have life. Although, of course, that's not what's happening at all.
No, I mean, actually, the New Testament comparison reminds me that they actually did this poster at one point, and I'm looking it up right now. It was it was the official cast picture for season 6, recreating the famous painting, The Last Supper, of the which is, as you'll know this better than me, but I think it's Jesus and the disciples like eating dinner together, the night before he gets betrayed by Judas or whatever. And I think that in this promotional art, Locke was in the place of Jesus. Let me see here. Let's see what Lostpedia says. Yeah, Locke takes the place of Jesus. Jack takes the place of the doubting Thomas. Saeed the place of Judas Iscariot, which I guess is a reference to him being taken over by monster illness in season 6. And Kate is in the place of Mary Magdalene. Interesting stuff here.
Huh.
I mean, I'm thinking that
they made Saeed Judas.
I know. Well, season 6 Saeed doesn't count. That's just, that's not canon as far as I'm concerned. But I think you're onto something with the, Locke as Jesus comparison.
Yeah. Interesting. It's been a while since we had a good biblical allegory on the show.
Right.
I guess we did just have Damon on talking about some of those themes, but feels
By the way, in case anyone forgets, we're having Damon back for the finale, so stay tuned for more Damon on the incident. But no, I mean, if you look at this the other way, if you look at it the way of, really Jacob wants this all to happen, maybe Locke does die so that others may live or find salvation. I mean, that is probably one reading that we should keep in mind as we go through the rest of the show.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
Do we want to talk at all about Daniel and Charlotte's death?
I mean, I think it's unavoidable.
Yeah. What do you think? Knowing what we know now, having talked to Rebecca Mader, having been talking throughout seasons 4 and 5 about this relationship, how did the death feel to you?
Lousy.
Yeah.
I mean, I know we've kind of discussed it to death. The best that before I spiel, did you feel any differently about it? Because I felt kind of gross.
I think I felt like it was a little less impactful this time around because, honestly, in part because there's so many other things happening in this episode
right.
that it's like the 4th most emotional moment, which just felt like kind of unfair to Charlotte and nothing against that scene necessarily, but like the punch that the Jin and Sun plotline packs, the punch that the Rousseau plotline packs, and then of course the final scene with John and Christian Shepherd, like that, it just kind of gets buried, and that is not the ending I wanted for Charlotte, which is sad.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think in my mind this was like, oh, this is the episode where Charlotte dies, which is not a positive way for me to remember the episode. Watching it, it didn't feel like, you're right, that wasn't the focal point, but I think it probably just hit so hard the first time I watched it in a bad way that kind of stuck. I guess one thing I was thinking watching this, I did feel partly more sympathetic to how they did it as I watched and realized like how nicely this is going to set up a really awesome Faraday storyline later in the season. Like The Variable is one of my favorite episodes of Lost, as we've discussed, and I think that Daniel's story and the build up to him making the speech, we're going to detonate a hydrogen bomb, and how that all comes from a place of wanting to save Charlotte, and how he's going to, try to change the rules in time and space to stop this moment from happening. I was kind of, remembering that as I watched this and thinking like, okay, like I do get, kind of why they killed Charlotte and why they wanted Faraday and Charlotte to be a focus early on in the season. But at the same time, I still felt like they could have done it in a much more exciting and engaging way than this. Like, they didn't really give Charlotte anything of interest to do in the first 5 episodes.
Yeah.
And they killed her in just such a horrifying way where she had no control over it and she didn't have any agency. Like, I found the reveal, the scene where she reveals her backstory, that she grew up there, she became an anthropologist to find the island, her mom told her she was making it up. I found that to be such an interesting backstory, and as I was watching it, like, wow, it would have been so much better if this had been, like, unveiled over time through a storyline that dealt with, her. I wanted to know, like, how did Charlotte feel when she finally got to the island, and what's it been like for her to be there, knowing that this is what she's been building towards her whole life, I mean, they could have done a great flashback episode for her.
Yeah. And it could have just been one episode, but I think it would have been so cool.
Well, let me blend this idea with something that I was thinking while watching it. I think what they should have done, here's my retroactive pitch to the Lost Writers of 13 years ago.
I'm sorry for how many of these you have received over the last 15 years.
No, but this is a really good one. I think that she should have lived until they got... I mean, I think that they wanted also to prove the seriousness of how scary the Flashes were, and I think they accomplished that, and I think they could have accomplished that without killing her. If they had gotten to the Orchid like a couple of hours earlier, she would have lived, which is ridiculous to think about. Yeah. I think they could have done that. They could have saved her in the nick of time here, even after doing this annoying storyline. And then I think she could have found the Dharma Initiative with them in the 70s and had an awesome flashback episode where we're learning about her history with the Dharma Initiative and trying to find them her whole life while she finally gets to see it in person and be back there for the first time while she's a little girl. And that could have all come together. And if they wanted to kill her, they could have killed her at the end of that episode in an exciting and heroic way where she had something interesting to do, where she finally was able to experience this grand catharsis with a great reveal for us of what it was like to finally find where she came from and realize that she wasn't crazy and kind of achieve her life's work. And then if they really wanted to kill her, do it at the end of that episode in classic Lost fashion, to kill someone at the height of their catharsis in their flashback episode. But why did they have to do it this way? It would have been so much better that way. Tell me I'm right. Tell me I'm right.
Oh, that's tempting.
I want to call up Rebecca Mader and bring her into this conversation so that she can enjoy this with us.
That's a really good take.
Thank you. We should bottle it and send it to Damon. Anyway, so Daniel and Charlotte we've talked about. What haven't we talked about?
The vast majority of my notes are on the on-island events.
Yeah. I did enjoy Kate and Saeed basically both telling Jack and Ben to go get fucked and running away.
Oh, they noped right out of there. Yeah.
Yeah, so justified, righteous anger. I appreciated it.
Yeah, I mean, Kate, finally somebody takes this poor child who's in the backseat of this car and goes home. And Saeed literally just says, like, absolutely not.
Saeed, where are you going?
I don't want any part of this. And if I see you, or him again, it'll be extremely unpleasant for all of us.
Don't call me. Just
this, despite the stuff with Charlotte, I thought this was an excellent episode. I really, really enjoyed watching this.
All right. Well, I think we have just about squeezed all of the juice out of this episode, and there was quite a bit.
Are you saying we talked too much, Rosie?
So this week's conversation is with Fanula Flanagan. Sammy had the chance to speak with Fanula last winter, and she has, I think, some remarkable insights into Eloise's character that I'm really, really excited to share with everyone.
I'm here with Fionnula Flanagan, who, of course, played Eloise Hawking on Lost. Debuted on the show in season 3, made a bunch of return appearances in seasons 5 and 6, which were quite memorable as well. Fanula, thank you very much for being with us on The Hatch.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Let's. I know this is going to be going way back here, but let's start at the beginning. Tell us how you got cast as this mysterious Miss Hawking character.
Well, I was sent the script, and I had never seen the show, so that was unfortunate because I didn't know any of the story or how it started or who these people were on this island. And so when I got the script, I phoned up the director and I said, could you, and his experience comes early on from the theater. He was a theater director. And then, so I phoned him up and I said, I've never seen the show and I'm very sorry about that, but because by this time it was huge. It was certainly enormous audience. And I said, well, could you please send me like a few DVDs or something so that I can at least see what the story's about? And he said, oh, don't bother, it won't tell you anything if I do that. So he said, anyway, the only thing is your character is the only character in the whole story who knows the past and the future, who can see the future. So I said, well, that's easy for me to play. Ask my kids, because I used to say to them, do you know what's going to happen to you if you don't do your homework? And so I pretended that I knew everything that would happen to them if you will not succeed. You'll have to go work in the button factory if you don't do your homework. So he said to me, so that'd be great. He said, it'd be just like wide open for you. And the show shot. So I said, thank you very much. I'll be there. Tell me when. And so, but I found myself then going throughout the shoot, because it was all shot on Hawaii, and we would, and very long hours we worked, I remember. And so I would go up to some other cast member and say, point to some line or somebody in the script, and I'd say, who are those people? What are they talking about? And the cast member would say to me, well, I'll tell you what, ask him over there because he's been in the show longer than I have, and so he knows what everything is. So I spent the first show very puzzled and trying to figure out, and I never did figure out what the smoke monster was, and I never figured out why there was a polar bear, not in my episodes, but there was a polar bear running around the jungle. So I wasn't able to, to find everything out, but I did enjoy it very much. And then I think there was one episode where I had to explain. One episode where I had to. There was a huge sort of. I was explaining what was happening and what was going to happen, if I remember correctly, and there was a huge needle in the middle of the room.
The pendulum in the Dharma station under the church. Yes,
that's right. And I had to sort of jump over that as I walked around the set, doing my dialogue at the same time. And I was wearing 3-inch heels, and so that was like risking my life and limb, as they say, for the sake of the Lost episode. But it was very enjoyable and to do, and of course,
one of the things I wanted to ask you, I went back and I watched the scenes that you appeared in, and that first episode in the third season where you're telling the character Desmond that he can't go and propose to the love of his life, Penny, that he has to do something else. When I went back to watch that, I thought to myself, okay, this is the Miss Hawking episode. When I think of that episode, I think this is the one where Miss Hawking shows up. And I go back and watch, and you're in two scenes that last for barely over 5 minutes. I mean, it's a pretty, it goes by pretty quickly, but it makes a powerful impression. I'm just curious what you were trying to bring to that character in short snippets like that, and what you thought of those moments where they didn't last very long, but they were obviously intensely interesting to people.
Well, thank you for saying that. I have no idea, because I had to assume that Miss Hawking was assuming a role, that she assumed different roles to please or to suit the circumstances. So here she is working in a jewelry store, and so I thought, I wonder what other role I meant to assume for whatever else they have in store. But you must remember, I had not seen or did not know the story of any of the previous episodes for 2.5 years before I came along. So it wasn't helpful to me, to necessarily find out what it was, because I was dropped in there like a pebble in a pool, and had all of obviously the rings that would go out from dropping a pebble into a pool would be that which would cause the next piece of the story. And so my encounter with Desmond and its mysterious nature just added to, and so it was a very good introduction of the character without explaining anything. And so I enjoyed that very much. And then, came down. Then, of course, I must tell you that people took it all so desperately seriously. Maybe you do too, I don't know, but I had the experience of being in the airport in Hawaii, in Honolulu, and people, this was after the show had finished and everything, and I was in Hawaii for some other reason, and people ran up to me and said to me, "I didn't like that ending. I didn't like that ending," and they, as though I had written it or produced it. And I said, "I'm very sorry. Are they going to come back? Are they going to do anything about it?" I said, "Oh yes, probably. They probably will. They'll fix it all."
That gets you out of that conversation more easily, perhaps.
Exactly.
That's funny. That's still better than the airport story that Michael Emerson told us. He said that he got on a plane once and someone looked at him on the plane and asked him, "Should I be worried that I'm on this flight?" People.
Yes, quite.
Well,
I had no idea what the ending was going to reveal anyway, so I was as surprised as everyone else.
Did you end up watching the show more after you got cast on it?
No.
Did you watch the finale? Because everyone seems like they watched the finale.
I watched it afterwards. I mean, somebody taped it and gave it to me so that I'd be able to see it. But I think I was overseas doing a film, and I can't remember when it finally finished.
Okay.
But and then someone told me, "Oh, did you know that this is the biggest hit of all time in television terms in China?" Which certainly amazed me because I thought I'd love to have seen it, in a Chinese version.
Interesting. Let me back up for a second because I skipped a few things here as we went all over. That director you mentioned at the beginning, that was Jack Bender, I assume.
Yes.
So he brought you in for that. So he brought you in for that first episode. That was his idea to bring you in.
I guess. Because I said to him, can you send me a few DVDs to help me understand what the story's about? And he said, "Oh, well, if you haven't been in it from the beginning, you won't understand anything." Right. No director ever said a truer word to an actress, Well,
that's interesting because when you not only in that appearance, but when you come back and you're featured more heavily in the fifth season. I mean, you talked about that scene with the pendulum. I mean, you have to deliver all sorts of dialogue about pockets of energy, and the island is moving through time and space, and you have this blackboard where you're writing all of these intense calculations. I mean, I guess I'm just curious as an actor how you deal with something like that, where it probably seems kind of like gibberish, but you also have to bring the gravity to it.
Well, I tell you, you must remember I had previously done or appeared in. What is the name of it? It's Star Trek, The Next Generation.
Okay.
It's called, and I actually played. I played. What is the name of the android in the show, in the story?
I wish I knew that, but I.
Oh, you don't? Oh, for shame! Everybody should know that. I thought you learned that in kindergarten.
They must have skipped it at my school.
Yeah. Anyway, it's played by an actor called Brent Spiner, who's marvelous. Okay. He plays himself. He plays his father, the scientist who invented him, and he plays his evil twin. And so I arrived in that show as his mother, and he was ecstatic to discover that he had a human mother and whatever. And so we go through this whole story. But if you are acquainted with the Star Trek shows, you have to say a lot of gibberish in those. I mean, there's a lot of pseudoscience, but maybe real science for all I know, that you have to recite. And so I was well prepared for Lost.
Interesting. Did you expect after that first episode that you were in that they would eventually bring you back, or was it a surprise when you were asked to return and then for several episodes in a row?
And so no, to answer your question, no, I didn't really know that I'd be coming back, but I think it was sort of inevitable because if you have a character who knows the past and the future, then you are at liberty to bring them in and out as you will,
They did, and not only did they do that, I mean, they ended up, as you're probably aware, having you playing the character, and then they also had younger versions of your character played at different periods of time by other actors. Which
oh yes, that's right. Yes, yeah. That was hilariously funny. I thought that was so funny because when I saw the photographs of the actresses who played, I think they had a younger woman, and then they had a child or something.
Yeah, maybe an older teenager.
Yes, and I thought isn't that strange? Because, you know, I'm 5'1.5" tall, and the actress who played me as a younger woman was much taller. And so when someone brought that to my attention, I said, well, you know, that's what happens to you if you go to that island, you know.
You shrink. You get taller.
You shrink, or you get taller, depending upon the time frame.
That's very funny.
So,
as a viewer, I have to tell you, I didn't notice that.
Listen, I've done a show where I played the oldest version of it. It was played by three women, three actresses who played her as a teenager, as a young woman, and then as an older woman. And I thought that, well, the very least they could have done was to have us all have the same eye color, but they didn't. And so I thought, this is really wild.
Interesting. As you know, as we've discussed, the first, you know, bunch of episodes you appear in, you're mysterious, you're an unknown, you know the past and the future. In the episode titled "The Variable," which is the episode about your son Daniel Faraday, your character son on the show, you know, that's when I think we finally get, you know, a little bit more of an understanding of you know, something of who Eloise is as a person, and we see that she's it's sort of a tragic story. We see her sort of pushing her son his whole life to, you know, away from the things he loves and towards you know, what she thinks the future is supposed to be for him, and ultimately, as we learn at the end, to his death on the island at her own hands in the past, which is a cruel irony. How did you feel about this character after, you know, reading that was what the story was going to be and learning what she was sort of really like?
Well, you know, I've had parents in my past. I was a child and I had parents, and I think she had, not that all parents are horrible and cruel as she turned out to be, but I think that all parents would really favor their children fulfilling their wishes for them, you know, fulfilling the wishes they have with all good intentions for them. And so I had to work with that. And then there are people in the world who are ruthless, you know. I mean, goodness knows I'm in a business that is totally ruthless.
Sure. So you sort of felt like you at least were able to understand it from that perspective, even though it's kind of...
yes, I think so. I mean, there are people who are ruthless and who want, hey, you know.
What did you think about in terms of your character's, you know, sort of deeper motivations? I mean, was she doing it out of love for her son? Was she doing it out of obligation to some higher power? I mean, how did you think about that as you played the role?
I think she was pre-programmed. I really do, and that's
interesting.
I really think she was pre-programmed, and probably if you look at the fact that she knew what the future would be, and who knew the future and the past, and knew how to manipulate them, and knew how to manipulate her son. I mean, then you can go from there into any of the wildest or wilder speculations about what motivated her.
So you're almost thinking about her like she's not even human.
Possibly. But no, I'm not actually, because we like to say that, I think, if you'll forgive my saying so, we like to say that about people whom we think of ourselves as being like really human, and I would never do that to so-and-so, or I would never pull that on somebody else. But in fact, we are all human, and that is a trait of humanity, to be ruthless and to want your own way.
I just meant in terms of when you say pre-programmed, I was trying to understand what that meant.
Well, I'm just speculating, or imagining, so I figured, well, pre-programmed.
Well, it's funny because when I was doing a little bit of research before this conversation, and at one point Damon Lindelof, the showrunner, referred to your character as a temporal policeman, which is kind of an interesting way to put it. I did want to ask, and you sort of answered this, but that scene when you were under the church and the pendulum, so that pendulum was really there, swinging back and forth, and you all had to avoid it as you walked around that room, right?
Well, I had to avoid it because I was the one walking around talking. So
phenomenal.
That's my memory of it. Yes. I mean, the pendulum scene, that whole scene, I will never forget, because I thought, I'm actually risking my life here for this television show. And because don't forget, I was wearing 3-inch heels and had to, skip around that pendulum and talk at the same time, talk gobbledygook. I mean, really stuff that I didn't understand, which is a feat, I can assure you. It's very easy for an actor to talk, to say dialogue that they understand, but when it's something that you don't understand, that's not so easy. However,
I've heard actors on medical shows make the same observation.
Yes, and on legal shows, they find themselves spouting all this legalese and no idea what it's about.
Yeah. Well, I mean, not only, by the way, were you walking back and forth with that pendulum, but as I recall, there was a scene where they made your appearance, a plot twist at the end of an episode, and you were had a hood shrouded over your head, and you were scrawling equations on the blackboard. They made it very, very mysterious. It was exciting to see your character again. I guess that's what they were doing.
Thank you. Well, go in for mystery as much as possible.
Yes. What just a big picture question, and I don't unfortunately know the entirety of your body of work, but where does, I guess, looking back, at the career you've had thus far, where does Lost fit in? Was it just another guest you did, or is there anything that makes it that makes it stand out for reasons good or bad, and in the scope of your career?
Well, because it was such a sort of an important show insofar as it was a huge hit with the audiences everywhere. And so everyone was talking about it at the time. And so you think, well, yeah, this is something to do because it's clearly a very popular show. But then I think what really made it for me was Jack Bender, who was terrific to work with. And he was the director who hired me to begin with. So, and because his background was in theater and because he's an artist and a painter and I liked Jack enormously, and then of course when I met his dog on the island, that he had adopted, it was wonderful. So I'd be his fan forever.
I just looked it up. His dog was Lulu. I'd forgotten the name. By the way, and you talked about, of course you were, a guest star, but on the finale, you and a couple of the other recurring guests actually got main cast billing in that last episode.
Did we really?
You did. Your name came across with the main cast at the beginning.
Isn't that lovely? Thank you.
Yeah. And usually, it's well deserved. As I said, your character is a very memorable one, especially relative to the amount of screen time you have.
Thank you, and I think that's due to the writing and to the fact that Jack directed it. I really do, and it's always really nice to, it demonstrates some kind of trust on the director's part, that he entrusts you with the character where little is known about them and their mystery is part of the story. That's always wonderful.
Oh, you didn't have anything to do with costuming your character, did you?
No, insofar as I never wear yellow, and I said to them, I never wear yellow because I look dead if you put me in yellow. But we did talk about what I should wear or would wear beforehand. Yes, we did have chats about that on the phone, and they did all the shopping and whatever, and there it was for me when I arrived.
I mostly asked that question because I read on the Lost Wikipedia that you had a pin on your shoulder wrap with an Ouroboros, which is an ancient symbol representing cyclicality, which seemed to be a statement about the past and future stuff.
Yes. In fact, was that the pin? Was that my own pin that I bought? I can't remember. I sometimes do that if it's what was the symbol on the pin?
An Ouroboros. It's a sort of a creature that's sort of devouring itself. Its head is sort of devouring the tail.
Its tail. Yes, that's a Celtic sign, and it's very ancient. I don't know because I actually do have a pin and I have a painting that's like that was done by an Irish artist. And so that would have been appropriate for her, of course, because
interesting.
She's very much into past lives and future lives that have not yet appeared.
So did you wear that on purpose, or is it just a coincidence?
No, nothing is a coincidence. There's no such thing, really, not for actors anyway. And I think it was probably consultation and war it, and we discussed. It was a long time ago. How long ago was that? I can't remember.
Those episodes probably would have been about 12 years ago, 13 maybe.
Oh my goodness!
I know. Time flies.
I can't remember, what I had for breakfast. It's you're really pushing it now. It was over 12 years ago as a teen.
Understood. I usually end these interviews by asking folks what they're working on now, and I know that might be a little bit challenging with the pandemic. So I guess I would ask you either what have you worked on most recently, or where can people see your work from your more recent work if they're interested in that?
I think the last thing I did was here in Los Angeles. I did the new David Mamet play, which we did for 10 performances only at a small theatre. I did that in February. Then lo and behold, the pandemic hit, and so I've been here ever since. I'm actually writing a book at the moment, so we'll see what happens with that.
Very nice. Can you say anything about the book thus far? Or
no, only that somebody kept saying to me, "You've got to write your autobiography," and I thought, I don't want to write my autobiography. But what I'm writing is sort of scenes that from my life that certainly made me laugh, and I love to make people laugh. That's what life should be all about, I feel. And so that I'm sort of struggling with writing these moments from my life that certainly make me laugh, and I hope will make other people laugh.
Well, I look forward to that, and to our listeners, you heard it here first, stories from Fanula Flanagan's life, hopefully coming to a bookstore or library near you in the future.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for making the time for this. I've enjoyed this conversation. I know it was a long time ago, but I hope I hope looking back has been a little bit pleasurable for you too.
Thank you. It has, and you've brought back some really nice memories. And if you see Jack around, give him my very best.
I absolutely will. Next time I talk with him, I'll tell him you said hello.
Do. Thank you.
Thank you, Fanula.
So something that Fanula says here that I think is really insightful and that I'm going to take with me is just that all people are capable of ruthlessness, and some people are ruthless, and Eloise is one of those people. Fanula makes a good point here that not that Eloise's intentions are necessarily good or bad, but she is ruthless in her pursuit of them. And that is to sort of serve this mission. I mean, it's almost like a military kind of mindset, that she is here in service of this mission and these orders. And that leads her to do some things that seem really shocking. How did that strike you, Sammy?
I mean, I like what you had to say about a military mindset, because I was struggling a bit with her use of the word pre-programmed, because I mean, I think she said it in a little bit of a flippant way, like she was kind of jokingly theorizing that Miss Hawking was some kind of a robotic agent of the island or of fate or something. But I like your interpretation of it, because it tells you that she pre-programmed in the sense that she was so. She had it so hardwired into her brain that she had to accomplish these goals like you would if you were, taking orders in the military, that she really she felt like she didn't have any choice but to send her, to send Daniel to, his death on the island, etc., because that was what her superiors or what the universe demanded of her, that those were the rules and that she had to follow them.
Yeah, I think, that's a really good point. And the person in the Lost universe that makes me think of is Mikhail Bakunin, who is one of the only other examples we have of sort of a soldier who is, committed to a certain cause or a certain set of principles or a certain leader, in a total way. And I think that's what's striking about Eloise, is the totality of that commitment. I mean, she has been committed to this for her whole life, and that's remarkable. And it does kind of make sense to me that that is her first priority. It is towering above all of the other priorities, and always will.
You know what this makes me want is to see Eloise's life story in full and to see how she became that person.
Yeah.
From the the younger versions that we see on the island, where she is not yet this quote unquote temporal policeman type character. Like, I want to know, did she have a moment of doubt like Mikhail had down in the Looking Glass station where he briefly questioned Ben's orders? Did she have fits of disbelief like Locke did, where he went to try to stop the button from getting pushed? Like, how did she become so rigid and uncompromising? I would love to see that story. I think that'd be fascinating.
Speaking of great interview guests, next week we are going to play the first part of our conversation with Jeff Fahey, aka Frank Lapidus, who you heard if you heard our teaser for this season. Frank, of course, reappears in 316 as the pilot of Ajira Flight 316 at the same number. It's a really fun conversation. I'm excited to share that.
As am I. In the meantime, before that episode is released next Thursday, please follow us on social media. We're on Twitter at The Hatch Podcast, also facebook.com/The Hatch Podcast.
If you could take the time to rate and review us on the podcast app of your choice, we would appreciate that very much.
Our theme music is by Andy G. Cohen, and our cover art is by Danny Roth.
See you next week.
Namaste.